Tomorrow, as we know, is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. He's an iconic figure of American history, known for his nonviolent direct action, for his incredibly powerful rhetoric, and the impact that he made for civil rights. Dr. King was assassinated at only 39 years old. Talk about a life cut tragically short. When we think of King, we think about racial justice issues. He was undoubtedly a key player in that arena, and I wouldn't speculate about his thinking that may have taken place over the last 50 years that he might have lived. What causes might have caught his attention? What new insights and strategies might he have introduced? What might he have done for the damaged soul of this country will remain unknown. We do know something about his final year of life, though. It's something that's usually ignored in celebrations of Dr. King. In the last year of his life, King focused on poverty that cut across class or cut across racial lines. He spent the last year of his life urging fellow activists to join together in a national Poor People's March on Washington. The Poor People's March on Washington was staged in May of 1968, just a month after King was shot. After his death, Ralph Abernathy did his best to bring King's vision into reality. His vision, King's vision, was to bring poor people to Washington, D.C., forcing politicians to see them and to think about their needs. King said this: "We ought to come in mule carts, in old trucks, any kind of transportation people can get their hands on. People ought to come to Washington, sit down, if necessary, in the middle of the street and say, 'We are here, we are poor, we don't have any money, you have made us this way, and we've come to stay until you do something about it.'" The Poor People's Campaign, or the Poor People's March on Washington, was an effort to gain economic justice for poor people in the United States. Organizers delivered a set of demands to Congress and other offices, and then 3,000 people set up camp on the Washington Mall and stayed there for 6 weeks. It was a multiracial, multicultural project, including African Americans, whites, Asian Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, all joined together to alleviate poverty, because it was affecting them all deeply. According to the 1960 census, 40 to 60 million Americans were living below the poverty line. That was 22 or 23% of the population then. The other exacerbating factor of poverty then was the population was moving to cities. That meant that people couldn't even grow their own food anymore because they didn't have land. At the same time, backlash of racism and sexism distorted the sort of national understanding of poverty as the stereotype of the welfare mother arose as a concept. Not everyone agreed with King's great idea. Some of his peers were done with civil disobedience. Some wanted more focused priorities on the war in Vietnam. Some wanted to keep with racial issues, but they kept moving forward together. In January, SCLC distributed an economics fact sheet describing the depth of poverty, and in February 1968, King announced the specific demands of the march. They wanted $30 billion for anti-poverty, full employment, guaranteed income, and an annual construction of 500,000 affordable residences. I believe that this is why we don't hear what King was fighting for in the last year of his life. We can wrap our heads around desegregation and civil rights. Those changes weren't taken lightly, to be sure, but today we can clearly agree that that was the right thing to do. But demanding the government build affordable housing for those in need, demanding 100% employment, and most radical of all, demanding a guaranteed income, those visions of a more equitable world make even liberals squirmy these days. Part of why I wanted to bring up King's Poor People's Campaign is that it's relevant as ever. The number of people living in poverty and the growing disparity in wealth in this country is profoundly immoral, and allowing that inequity to persist endangers our common humanity. Several Tapestry members are learning about the housing crisis and homelessness. The numbers are staggering. In Orange County in 2019, 6,800 people were found to be living without permanent homes. That's Orange County, 6,860. For most of us, because homelessness is not part of our daily lives, we tend to think of that crisis as separate from the economy that we live and work and have our daily lives in. But the first two causes of homelessness here, according to research, are job insecurity and the cost of housing. Those factors are not about personal choices or addiction or illness. They're economic factors, stemming from the same economy that everyone in this room is a part of. Homelessness isn't a strange, mysterious circumstance that happens to those people, or something those people chose. Homelessness at this scale is a product of a lopsided, you might say broken, economy. This next part is a little bit technical, and Glenn Pascal can probably explain it better than I can. But much of this current crisis has emerged in the aftermath of the 2007 recession. Since then, the wealth disparity has increased significantly because there are fewer ways for people to build wealth. After the housing crisis in 2007, fewer Americans own homes and fewer are invested in the stock market. But the impact hasn't been equal across income brackets. Household wealth based on these sources jumped 80% in the past decade, but more than 1/3 of the wealth, 16.2 trillion, went to the top 1%. Just 25% of the wealth went to the middle class, and 2% of the wealth gained went to the bottom 50% of the population. I don't normally like talking about statistics in sermons, but these numbers are really important. They tell us that the pinch that we are feeling and the increasing homeless population that we're seeing are not a matter of misperception. They're a very real reflection of a horribly imbalanced economy. When we add the lens of race, the disparity actually gets far worse. When compared to the income of white Americans, black household income peaked in 1977, as black households brought in 62% of what white households made then. By 2016, that percentage had fallen so that black households made 57% of the income of white households. And the housing collapse that we were just talking about was particularly cruel to prosperous black homeowners. By 2016, median black household wealth had fallen to 9% of whites, the same level as 1965. One reason I wanted to talk about King's Poor People's Campaign is that it's as relevant as it ever was. The other reason I wanted to talk about it is to remember a wider vision of the man. In the months before he died, King demanded profound economic reform from the federal government. If we're going to celebrate the legacy of Dr. King with any level of responsibility, we can't ignore what he was fighting for in his last year. His fourth and final book was called Where Do We Go From Here? It actually was a hopeful vision. He talked about nonviolence to end the Vietnam War so that those resources could be better spent at home. And he addressed the financial reforms needed. He wrote, "I'm now convinced that the simplest approach will prove to be the most effective. The solution to poverty is to abolish it directly by a now widely discussed measure, the guaranteed income." The guaranteed income is an idea that I'm hearing more and more about. I didn't know until this week that King was advocating for it 52 years ago. The basic premise is give everyone enough money to meet their basic needs across the board. There's no eligibility requirement, no tests, no complicated policy, no line to stand in or hoop to jump through. Just give people money. It sounds far-fetched until you hear some of the arguments for it. The simplest argument is about efficiency and transparency in the welfare mechanics. Instead of separate programs like unemployment insurance, pensions, disability, housing support, and a bunch of other ones, it could be one basic payment. It would reduce the bureaucracy and save money that could go directly to the people that need it. Another argument is a little more philosophical. Giving people money without qualifications acknowledges that people have the right and the responsibility to make decisions for their own lives. As King said, a host of positive psychological changes inevitably will result from widespread economic security. The dignity of the individual will flourish when the decisions concerning their life are in their own hands. Now, the final reason that we're hearing more about it today, about this guaranteed income, is about technology and the way it's impacted our workforce. Did you know Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook and Elon Musk of Tesla are both supporters of universal basic income? Like a lot of people, they believe that automation through technology is creating an economy that simply doesn't have enough jobs for people to work and get paid. If we can't provide opportunities for people to make money, then maybe we need to give them money directly. So where does all this talk of poverty leave us? Mostly financially secure folks in South Orange County on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I have two suggestions. The first is about proximity and awareness. It's impossible for us to truly understand a problem without knowing some of the people impacted. A lot of us have learned this about immigration. Getting to know the people impacted by policies radically deepens our understanding of the problem. It's a basic tenet of social justice work, too. Problems aren't solved by lobbing in answers from the outside. Problems are solved by getting to know people and then acting in solidarity with them to create a better world. One last set of statistics that reminded me of this community because so many of you are retired. This is about savings. In 2016, half of all families had no savings at all. The average savings per household was $7,800. In 2016, the household savings for those nearing retirement age averaged $21,000. While the stock market is booming for those who are able to buy into it, the bottom of our economy is falling out for those who are trying to put food on the table and gas in their tanks to get to work. There's a lot about this country and this economy that most of us, including myself, don't understand because of financial privilege. We've got to broaden our circles and make more room at the table if we're going to untangle this mess. The second suggestion that I have is about leaning into ideas that are uncomfortable. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was not and should never be a voice of comfort to the privileged people in this room. He was a prophet who pointed out the evils of systemic injustices and demanded change, big change, change that would impact all of us. So this week, as people celebrate the great American visionary, I want us to remember that his vision was big, and it demanded change for all of us. And we can celebrate that vision of beloved community while we acknowledge that we will have a lot of work and a lot of sharing to do